the highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the highlands, a-chasing the deer, a-chasing the wild deer, and chasing the roe. My heart's in the highlands, wherever I go.
One of the things that is involved here is for students and others, I suppose, to see somebody who belongs to a very unlikely profession, a profession that 50 years ago was considered rather odd. That is to say, the profession of the man who writes books. On this table are a few of my books in various editions. The ones that I brought are in paperback editions, and they are The Human Comedy, which is a novel which is set over on San Benito Street, which I call San Benito Avenue for reasons of my own, just beyond the old Emerson School, which is no longer in existence. The other one is called My Name is Saroyan, which is a story about the Saroyan family. Nobody in the world can pronounce that name, and it's perfectly all right for nobody to try. And the third book is called The Man with the Heart in the Highlands and Other Short Stories. That's these three books which are there upon the table. The reason I brought these books is that much of the writing in these books concerns itself with scenes that are familiar to the people who live in this city, this magical city, to somebody like myself who has known it over so many years. It's a changing city. It's not the city that it was, but no one need regret that, because everything does have to change. I am very happy about having been asked to expose myself to this pleasant assignment of being seen by people and being seen in relation, for instance, I'll emphasize it, of a book. I wrote this book. Now, when I was about the age of Randall Gerald here and of Naomi and Christine, books began to mean something to me that made the whole business of living very, very endlessly fascinating and richer than it ever had been before, although it was never without its incredible richness. Before that, very early, I thought books were written by, let's say, the public library or by God. That is to say, they were just there, like mountains were just there and rivers were just there, books were just there. And then when I learned that, no, Charles Dickens was a specific person and that he was like everybody else, a thought crept into my head which I found very intriguing. And the thought was, well, if Charles Dickens could do it, why couldn't William Saroyan do it? And I may say that in the second grade, I was asked at Emerson School by a very wonderful lady there, Miss Brockington, if I wished to be known as Will, Willie, Bill, or William. And I gave the matter a little bit of thought, thinking of my biography in years and years to come, and I said, William, if you don't mind. And so at school, even though I had passed along that word, I was called Bill and Will and Willie, and sometimes by the teachers mainly, not by the other students, William, as if I were aware that I was a writer even then. In a sense, I was. One is always who one is. Now, having made that preamble, I would like to turn to Mr. Stepanovich for his expert guidance in our having a sharing of ideas and the responsibility of looking into the camera in the right way and in being seen in the right way and in perhaps exchanging ideas with these students.
I think the first thing I'd like to ask of you is which of your works would you have considered the most important or your best? And then I think the students in particular, I can speak for the two young ladies who I know have read just about every one of your works. I'd like to have them explain to them why they picked a particular book and liked it. And first of all, I want to know what you would consider your best works.
The answer is, of course, that no writer wants to do such a thing as choose, but I will choose. I think that the best works are the ones that I did bring. That leaves out the plays. I have some interesting plays as well, but I think that the best novel that I have, certainly insofar as people liking it is concerned, is the novel called The Human Comedy. The best collection of short stories might be My Name is Aram, and then The Man with the Heart in the Highlands and Other Short Stories is a good example of a variety of short stories of mine. Now, I began as a short story writer, and I love the form, but nobody could not try to write in all of the forms. But I'm also fond of a play of mine called The Time of Your Life, and I have other plays. My Heart's in the Highlands, for instance, which did come, was enlarged from The Man with the Heart in the Highlands and made into a play way back in 1938. My goodness, that's a long time ago. It seems only a few days ago that I was doing that work. That was originally a short story, but that is a very famous play and is done all over the world, as The Time of Your Life is also. And then I will add this one thought, taking up so much time that I feel awkward about it, and I hope that we can manage to cope with the problem later on. A writer finds it difficult not to be most devoted to the work that he is presently doing, about which he doesn't like to talk, or the work he has just completed. And I can say that I'm just back from 6 months in Paris, where I did a lot of work, and I like the works that I just did. I did quite a few things all at once: a play, and a novel, and a group of related essays, so to say. And I'm very fond of those. But the works that count are the works that reach people. In other words, a work doesn't have a real reality until it does reach people, and nor does a play really become a play until it's performed. Now, excuse me for taking so long.
Kathy, what was your favorite? As we'll ask later on to Mrs. Saroyan more questions, but what was your favorite book would you consider?
Well, I would have to say I enjoyed The Human Comedy, and I think, well, as you mentioned, these three books here, they're all kind of close to home. I mean, you recognize some of the names of the streets and you know, various places, and I think that's part of it. And then I like his style of writing generally. In all your books, there's the warmth and get the family idea, and I enjoyed that, I think, the best.
Well, Kathy has said something that touches me deeply, because, of course, frequently a writer doesn't really know what he's doing in those subtle terms. But when you say you like the style because it's warm and so forth, that does satisfy me very much. Thank you. I'm very happy to hear that.
Carla?
Well, I enjoyed all of your books, but to choose one, I'd say The Human Comedy, because it seems so natural. And it was, like Kathy said, it was close to home, and I recognized quite a few of the places that you mentioned. And it seemed like it was so real and so natural.
Again, Carla, it's good to hear these kind words, and that we've all three of us answered Mr. Stefanovich's question by naming The Human Comedy as our favorite.
Well,
And,
pardon me, but they named Human Comedy, and so have you. Yet I personally, and of course I think I've read just about every one of your works, Poppy, You're Crazy, to me was probably the finest. Maybe the fact that I'm older, I have children, and this was, to me, one of the finest works. But I want to ask, too, on the Poppy, You're Crazy, was this dialogue designed for a set purpose between a father and a son, or was this just...
Well, of course, when we take the raw material of the human experience and transfer it to the dimension of art, the selectivity is incredible. To get a little bit of a dialogue, let's say when the father is telling the boy to count the red beans that are going to go into a pot. It isn't that he wants the boy to count the red beans. He doesn't need to know how many red beans there are. He wants the boy to notice that each bean is different. a little bit, and thereby also to understand that this is true of all things. And you mustn't just rush over things. You must notice each thing separately if you want to really appreciate what you're dealing with. And so that actually happened, and but then many other things happened that are not included in the book. And what I'm saying is the answer. First of all, I want to thank you very much for liking Papa, You're Crazy, because this is one of, I have written many works that have been failures with the public. Now, I love the public because I only know them one at a time, and they're irresistible one at a time. But the fact is that many books just don't make out well, and Papa, You're Crazy did not make out well, although it has been translated into the 3 of the 6 languages of Yugoslavia, which made me very pleased, and they put very nice drawings with it, but essentially the book is unknown, and so I'm not even sure that one could obtain it at the public library. Nevertheless, it had an importance to me because, having written a book for my daughter called Mama, I Love You, I felt that there should be a companion volume to be written for my son. And so we had the 2 books together, Papa, You're Crazy. And the first book is a fuller book, and the second book, Papa, You're Crazy, is a much tighter, more artful book. That is to say, it's almost like prose poetry. It's a very lean book. And I have expectations, like all writers, that someday this book will be rediscovered, so to say. But if it isn't, it's perfectly all right, and there will be no loss. Do you and your friends, the other boys at Emerson School, find that you don't like to read, or do you like to read?
I do,
You do like to read.
yes.
Because there was always a tendency amongst my friends to dislike reading. They felt it was something much less significant than playing ball. Now, you're a pretty good athlete, I know that, aren't you? Do you play ball?
Yeah.
There you are. I would guess that. So it seems that the tradition of being immersed, of being inside the whole large universe of books, of print, is more English than it is American, and more Eastern, like New England, than it is Californian. Where the Californian takes his reading more or less on the bounce, because he is preoccupied and has been preoccupied with other usages of his time and his leisure and his energy. Mainly it was to make out. Making out mean to improve his life and his circumstances. It was certainly true of my family. What we wanted to do as quickly as possible, after coming here in 1908, when I was born, my people came first from New York and Paterson, New Jersey, but before that they came from the highlands of Armenia. And when they got here to California and knew that this is where they were going to spend some time, the idea was to make out. That is to say, everybody to work and help save enough money to buy a house. And that meant that you didn't have a lot of time for reading. And that was to explain my sympathy for the continuing lack of urgent appeal of books until people do find that they have a lot of leisure and also are more eager to look for answers. That's an important thing to bear in mind about books, that they will supply people with some of the things they're not able to get from other people, because this goes back to books having been written by people. And we all tend to find that the people that we know intimately in our lives don't have all of the answers. And so that's when it's a good idea to go to the books, because the books do have many of the answers. They don't have all of them, but they have good ways of saying that they don't know the answers. And of course that's valuable too. Now again, Mr. Stepanovich, I hope that we're not giving anything like an impression of not progressing, but I had hoped that we could draw out everybody around me so that we might get to some of the things that maybe the viewers that are not here, that are going to be looking at what we're doing at the tape later, might have some of their answers, their questions answered. Now, for instance, I would like to invite Kathy and Carla, being older than Gerald and Christine and Naomi, to ask questions that have come to them about writing itself, about writers, about the action of writing, about perhaps their own inclination to attempt writing and so on. So if you could encourage them to do that, that would permit me to close my big mouth for a moment. Don't you see?
Kathy, anything?
Well, I guess I would like to ask you, in most of your books, did you actually have someone in mind when you were writing, your characters? Or did you combine, different people that you knew, or were they purely fiction?
Well, Kathy, the fact is that both are always true, and I think with all writers. There are some writers who simply have to have actual people in mind in order to be able to begin to write. And of course, there's always the writer himself, who can be, as in the case of Shakespeare, all of his people. Now, the range of Shakespeare's people are from the commonest, simplest, most undeveloped people to the most complicated people, such as Hamlet, and the most exalted people in terms of family fantasy, such as royalty. Now, nevertheless, all of those people are also mainly Shakespeare, variations of him, and so he has this capacity to be all people. Writers tend to have that. Now, in the human comedy, we do have a lot of characters and one main family, which is a Fresno family. The family is called Macaulay. The family could have been called Saroyan. The family could have been called Kubo. The family could have been called Nielsen. But you make an arbitrary choice, and then when the Kubos and the Nielsens and the Lees and the Perezes and Villarreals read it, they feel that, and rightfully, that it is something that they know, because it is something that they know, because the point of that book was to make of commonplace family reality some sort of art. And by art, I mean to notice it with such care and with perhaps, if I'll be permitted to use that term, with such respect and even fondness that the reader knows that this is his place and some of his experience. And so to continue the answer about who does a writer write for, or how does he create his characters. Frequently, the writer will begin with somebody specific, and then the character, as it is being written, begins to create its own reality, so that it doesn't really matter that you started with somebody. For instance, let's say that I was to write, to imagine and write a story about Gerald Lee, which I could do. As I begin to invent the story, it would go past Gerald, and it would become a story of a boy in the world, and a boy in the world of Fresno, for instance. And then when Gerald read it, if he did read it, he would say, it seems a lot like me, but also his brother would say the same, and then his friends would say the same. So the point is that you make what we'll call an art truth in the writing. And when you make that art truth, that truth of language, usage of language, then the person who takes the time to read it, it takes a little bit of time. For instance, a painting you look at immediately, but a work of writing, it takes a little bit of time. And during the time taking, the person who is reading almost inevitably puts himself into the work. And if it is sound and right, he likes to be into work. But if he finds that something is the matter, he won't read it. I mean, he'll put it aside because it doesn't ring true, or it's maybe something that he doesn't especially like. Although there are very, very great works about people that are not the people like those in the human comedy. I thank you for that question, and I invite Carla Nielsen to ask a question.
When you started to write the human comedy, did you have a specific family in mind, or like you said, you were talking about any family, but did the accident or did the parts of the book the incidents really happen to anyone close to you?
Yes, they all happened to either to myself or to people very close to me, and of course the family was inevitably my own family with another name. But again, just as I explained in the reply to Kathy, it goes past the family very quickly and becomes a story about people. You see, this is what is desired, but you can't tell a story about people until you have chosen the specific people, that is to say, what you know. It has to be what you know for it to ring true. And then, after that good luck has been established, then it's a story for anybody. And you hope, certainly the writer hopes that what he does will be appealing to anybody. But one is definitely at a great advantage when he writes about what he knows. It took me as a young writer, as a very, very young writer, before I was 15, to understand that writing is not stuff that is happening far away. I used to think it was. And I used to put all of my stories in places like Paris, and London, and New York, and I was over there on San Benito Street, don't you see? And until finally it came to me that what I'm saying about these other places just won't do, because I'm writing out of ignorance, and I'm guessing. And had it been powerfully imaginative, it might have had something, but I was too young for that, too, don't you see? So the safest thing for anybody that might be listening or looking who does find that there is an impulse to write is to be sure and write about his own experience, about the people that he knows, and about what he has experienced. And no matter, even if he thinks it's very little, if he looks at it carefully, it's a great deal. It's a very, very great deal. Of course, Jane Austen, somebody that you will read fully in time to come, made little everyday things into a monumental understanding of the human heart, and at the same time wrote beautifully, as one illustration. In other words, it wasn't necessarily like some of the famous writers that we all cherish very deeply. For instance, Joseph Conrad was a writer of stories of the sea and of great adventure and great mystery, in which at the same time emerged some of the odd, dark sides of the human heart and mind. That was another kind of writing, and that was his territory. Each writer does have a style, inevitable, even however greatly his skill is developed and sharpened and improved, the style is himself. He has that, and then he does have the awareness of what he can do, and he does it. Now, for instance, if somebody told Joseph Conrad, for instance, to write a comedy like those of the great Oscar Wilde, an Irishman, and Joseph Conrad was a Pole who became a writer of English, Joseph Conrad wouldn't be able to do it. That's not his field. And if you told Oscar Wilde, on the other hand, write us a little story about the ocean and about sailors, it wouldn't be possible. Although he would do something, and it would be very amusing, because he was an amusing writer. But each writer, and each person, as a matter of fact, when we're speaking of writers, we're speaking of people, each person is uniquely himself. Even when he is in a family, and the family has its own relationships and special quality, each person in the family is still uniquely himself. And of course, if you have brothers and sisters and have your fights with them, you know all too well how true that is, because there are differences among people, and you can love them very deeply and still know that you're different, and that they are different, sometimes favorably and sometimes unfavorably, although if you're judging, they are always unfavorable and you're favorable, because that's the best. It's better to be yourself than to be somebody else. Everybody has that wonderful built-in idea about himself, and it's a very good one. Comes to it. But before we end our little visit, and I want to say that I'm now going to say what I might have said earlier. Very happy to have been asked to this, especially in my hometown. This is my birthplace, Fresno, California. I want to thank the people who are responsible for my little visit. It's been very pleasant, and I hope that if there is to be a series of exposures of writers to the eyes and imaginations and minds and intelligences of kids in the schools, that these exposures will have, perhaps in ways that we can't even guess now, value to the kids. I know that if I were a kid and there was somebody out there trying to make sense, I would be fascinated, and I would be reaching a lot of conclusions about who that person really is and was and what he was doing. I did go to the Parlor Lecture Club in Fresno 50 years ago, but never by admission. I went as a messenger, and I mentioned some of the people that talk at those clubs in the human comedy, and I had my reserved opinions about them. Mainly, the feeling I had was they probably really aren't foolish, but the activity of getting up there and trying to communicate with a lot of strangers about things that the strangers weren't interested in made them certainly seem foolish. And on that note, we will consider the meeting closed. It's been a great pleasure to be with all of you.
Before we close, I, in behalf of myself, the students, and the County of Fresno, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to visit with us, and may this film go on for years, and welcome back, and we're glad to say that you're a part of Fresno, Mr. Saroyan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stepanovich.